Hey guys, tonight we are stepping onto the high, sun-bleached roads of the Andes, where the air is thin, the llamas look unimpressed, and your lungs are already wondering why you thought this was a good idea. The Inca Empire stretches all around you, valleys stitched together by mountains, rivers, and stone. You're about to walk down paths that people carved into cliff sides without wheels, iron tools, or a single piece of graph paper. It's both awe-inspiring and, if you're honest, the sort of hike where you probably quit before reaching the first checkpoint. You probably won't survive this. At least, not if you try to keep up with the couriers who made the Inca communication system tick. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, leave a comment with your location and local time. I always love seeing where people are tuning in from and just how late you're letting me keep you awake. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The stone stretches beneath your sandals in an impossibly straight line, a ribbon winding across ridges and valleys. This is not just a footpath, it is the backbone of an empire. The Incas called it the Capac Nan, the Royal Road, and it runs for thousands of miles. If you're imagining some dirt track with potholes, no. These highways were crafted with flat paving stones, retaining walls, and drainage canals. Parts of it cling to sheer cliffs. Parts dive through forests, and some sections still survive today, centuries after Spanish conquistadors came storming through, utterly baffled at how such a system worked without horses or carts. As you walk, you notice tiny steps carved into slopes, neatly tear zigzags to manage the climb. The Andes are basically mountains stacked on top of mountains. And yet here is this road, stubbornly threading across the landscape like someone just refused to take too steep for an answer. You don't walk long alone. Soon you hear the patter of sandals against stone, faster and lighter than yours. A figure darts past, barely breaking a sweat. A chasqui, the Inca relay runner. These were the postal service, the FedEx overnight delivery, and the neighborhood gossip all in one. Each chasqui was trained for stamina and speed. Usually from youth, they lived in pairs at relay stations, ready to sprint at a moment's notice. When one runner came panting with a message, the other bolted forward, the handoff smoother than any Olympic baton exchange. Messages could cross hundreds of miles in a matter of days, sometimes less. Imagine that. No horses, no wheels, no internet, just lungs, legs, and lungs again. Historians still argue whether chasquis carried small drums or conch shells to announce their arrival, but the mental image is delightful. You, half asleep in your mountain hut, jolting awake to the sound of someone tooting a giant seashell at 3 a.m. The runners carried three things: a staff, a pouch, and sometimes a quipus, the knotted cord system that will poke at in a bit. The staff marked their authority, so no one confused them for a random jogger. The pouch held coca leaves, those little green chews that gave a boost of energy and dulled hunger. Basically the Inca version of an energy drink. You, wheezing behind them, might wish you had a six-pack of those leaves. The pace of it all is almost comical. Imagine a string of ultramarathoners dotting the highway. Every few miles another guy crouched, waiting. A messenger leaves Cusco with a decree from the Sapa Inca, sprints to the next tampu, hands it off, and within minutes another runner is tearing down the path. The message never stops moving, day or night. It's like watching an endless game of tag, except the prize is empire-wide stability. You pass one such relay station. A small stone hut sits off the road, just big enough for two lean figures to nap, snack, and trade stories while waiting for the next arrival. Inside, dried corn hangs in bundles. Clay jars hold chicha-beer, and somewhere there's a pile of coca leaves. You picture them chatting. So what's the message today? More potatoes? Another war? Or just another reminder that the emperor is divine? There's a story that runners once carried fresh fish from the coast up into the mountains for the emperor's dinner, arriving before the fish could spoil. Think about that. 1,000 meters of elevation, no refrigeration, no Uber Eats driver weaving through traffic, just legs and lungs. And you're still standing here, considering whether to sit down on the nearest rock and declare yourself permanently retired. The roads themselves help make this system possible. built with retaining walls. Sometimes cut directly into cliffs, they resisted landslides and flooding. Rope suspension bridges stretched across gorges, swaying with terrifying grace. You grip the railing, woven grass ropes, maybe 2 feet wide, and try not to look down at the river boiling beneath you. The chasqui doesn't even hesitate. He just bounds across, sandal straps flapping, as though gravity doesn't exist. You mutter a few choice words not fit for bedtime, shuffle after him, and pray you make it to the other side. The truth is, this road system wasn't only for mail. Armies marched here. Traders trekked. Pilgrims wandered towards sacred shrines. But the communication network, the runners, the stations, a constant stream of motion, held it all together. You keep walking. The sun slides lower, painting the peaks in molten orange. Somewhere far ahead, another runner is already on his way, bearing a message you'll never see, a knot you'll never untie. You just hear the faint patter of sandals fading into the distance, swallowed by the Empire's endless stone spine. You stop at a relay station to catch your breath, and while your legs demand a break, your hands start fiddling with something far more puzzling than any mountain trail, a bundle of cords dangling like a rainbow that's been tied into knots. This is the quipu, the Inca's peculiar answer to writing, or maybe not writing. Historians still argue whether quipus count as true written language or something closer to a three-dimensional abacus. But either way, here you are, staring at it like a cat with a ball of yarn. Each quipu is made of a primary cord, with smaller cords hanging down like tassels. The cords are dyed in different colors, spun from cotton or alpaca wool, and tied with an obsessive variety of knots. Figure 8 knots, long knots, single knots. You tug gently at one, hoping you don't accidentally reply all to the entire empire. The runners carry these quipus as records of messages. Sometimes numbers, sometimes names, sometimes entire stories encoded in fiber. To modern eyes, they look like a mesh your earbuds make in your pocket. But to a trained quipus a keeper of the cords, each knot was legible. They could glance at the spacing, the type, the twist direction, and say, "Ah, yes, this cord says 300 llamas, 200 potatoes, and also that you forgot to pay your taxes." The neat trick? The knots represented numbers in a base 10 system. Position mattered. Knots higher on the string meant higher values. Knots lower meant smaller ones. It's basically the world's earliest spreadsheet, except instead of Excel formulas, you had sheep will dye blue. You imagine being a chasqui with one of these slung around your neck. The emperor sends you off with a quipu about crop yields, and now you're sprinting up switchbacks. Pray you don't trip and accidentally add a few zeros to the maize harvest. Whoops, sorry, your majesty. Guess you'll be expecting 10,000 tons instead of 100. And here's the quirky tidbit. Quipus may have been more than just math. Some researchers argue they contain stories or even phonetic elements, meaning the cords might have captured spoken language. A few quipus seem too complex to just tally goods. Patterns emerge like secret sentences woven into yarn. Other scholars push back, insisting it was purely numeric, like color-coded filing cabinets. The debate continues, with modern computer models analyzing knot patterns, hoping to decode the Andean archives. For now, it remains a mystery. Imagine how soothing that must have been, though. Tying little knots to hold the memory of your empire. No papyrus, no parchment, no stone tablets. Just soft wool, easy to carry, impossible to smudge. You can almost hear the gentle rasp of fiber between fingers, the patient twisting a cord as someone quietly writes the story of community in knots. It's a bedtime craft project, except instead of making friendship bracelets, you're helping govern 10 million people. There's even a record of quipus being used in everyday life. Small communities kept them as census records, noting births, marriages, and harvests. You imagine a village elder pulling one out like, "Yes, see this brown cord here? That's when your cousin borrowed my llama and never brought it back." Meanwhile, the chasquis themselves weren't expected to read every quipu. They were more like Amazon couriers, carrying the packages safely without opening them. At the next station, a trained quipus would check, interpret, and, if necessary, tie a few new knots to update the message. You picture an Inca relay system that's basically a combination of marathon running and knitting club. But what if you forget which color meant which category? Yellow might be corn, or maybe it's gold shipments, or maybe your little brother was playing with the dye pots again. The whole thing depended on memory and training. It took years for a quipus to master the code, and only a select few held that knowledge. In other words, job security was excellent. Unless, of course, you tied the emperor's tax receipts into a cat's cradle by mistake. There's one story about a Spanish friar who burned dozens of quipus because he feared they contained pagan idols in string form. Whether they were just boring census data or secret poems to the sun god, we'll never know. You can almost hear the soft crackle of a catching flame and the collective groan of future historians losing yet another archive. You fiddle with the quipus again, letting the knots slide over your fingers. You think about how words on a page freeze language into symbols, but knots require touch, motion, and memory. They're a language you don't just read, you feel it. A strangely comforting thought, especially when you're already half lulled by the rhythm of sandals against stone, by the hiss of wind brushing down from the mountains. As you hand the quipus back to the waiting keeper, you wonder how many secrets are still tied up in these cords. Were there epic tales of battles knotted alongside potato inventories? Did someone once slip in a joke, a secret love message, or a playful doodle in string form? Historians still argue whether we'll ever fully crack the code. For now, the cords swing lightly, their colors fading in the twilight, whispering a story you'll never quite understand. Your sandals scuff the stone as you trudge onward, and the rhythmic clack of footsteps reminds you that messages weren't just about knots and runners. They were about what those messages actually said. After all, you don't build a continent-spanning postal service just to gossip about llamas' new haircuts, tempting though that might be. No, the Inca communication system pulsed with the lifeblood of the empire, royal decrees, military orders, crop reports, and the occasional potato update that probably mattered more than the generals thought. Picture this. A runner dashes from Cusco with a decree from the Sapa Inca himself, the living child of the sun, king of kings, the one man whose word could send entire armies marching or, more critically, demand your village's corn harvest by Tuesday. That decree races across the Andes at breakneck speed, jumping from relay to relay until it reaches a provincial governor, who nods solemnly and immediately starts reorganizing everyone's weekend plans. Forget your cousin's wedding friend. The emperor wants quinoa. The mainstream fact is that the system allowed the Inca state to operate with breathtaking efficiency. Soldiers could be mobilized quickly, resources allocated across far-flung provinces, and taxes tallied with near-bureaucratic precision. In a world without wheels, horses, or writing as we know it, the Incas managed what many medieval kingdoms in Europe could only dream of: a reliable, empire-wide news feed. But of course, mixed in with the serious commands were dispatches about food. Agriculture was everything here. Maize, quinoa, and especially potatoes had to be monitored, counted, and redistributed. One scholar quipped that the empire ran on tubers, and it's not far off. You imagine a message bouncing from runner to runner. Emergency alert. Potatoes sprouting funny eyes. Dispatching agronomist immediately. If you think government memos about potato diseases sound boring, congratulations. You found the perfect bedtime story. And then there's a quirky tidbit. It wasn't just potatoes and maize. Messages may have included updates on llama herds, guinea pig breeding, or coca leaf reserves. You can almost picture an emperor's secretary leaning over, whispering, "Your Radiance, the sacred guinea pigs of the northern valleys are multiplying at a concerning rate." Somewhere a quipus recorded every last whisker. But here's where historians still argue. What about personal communication? Was the mail system purely for state use? Or did ordinary villagers ever sneak in a note? Could one runner have carried, say, a marriage proposal knotted into a quipus, or a friendly reminder that Annie's llama was wandering again? Some insist the network was exclusively for official business. Others hint at a grayer area, imagining villagers bribing runners with snacks to slip in a personal message. You, standing there chewing on a coca leaf for energy, might be tempted to test that theory. "Hey, could you just drop this note off in the next valley? It's about my neighbor's suspiciously large potato harvest." The more you walk, the more the messages seem to float around you. You hear them in the wind like echoes. Orders to build a new terrace, reports of successful festival, warnings about a distant tribe stirring trouble. In a world without ink and paper, the empire was buzzing with communication, and all of it, every chord and word, flowed back to Cusco, the navel of the world, where the Sapa Inca sat like a spider at the center of a web. The efficiency is startling when you compare it to other civilizations. In Europe, a royal letter might take weeks to arrive. In the Andes, thanks to the chasqui relay, messages could cross hundreds of miles in just a few days. This was not just impressive. It was empire-saving. An outbreak of frost in one valley meant swift redistribution of food supplies from another. A hint of rebellion meant troops could be on the move almost before the rebels had finished painting their banners. And yet, you can't help but smirk at the thought of all this seriousness being carried in the sweaty pouch of a man running barefoot up a mountain. Somewhere, one unlucky courier was probably tasked with relaying the emperor's romantic overtures. Imagine sprinting 30 miles to deliver the ancient equivalent of, "Hey, meet me at the festival with a gold headdress." Not quite as inspiring as troop movements, but important in its own way. As twilight settles, you picture one of those messages being relayed by firelight. The quipus cords gleaming red in the glow. The runner, panting, hands it over with a bow. The local official squints, fingers and knots, and mutters, "Ah yes, more potatoes." You sigh. Of course it's always potatoes. Potatoes, decrees, and occasional war. And that's the Inca Empire in a nutshell. A civilization held together by stone roads, breathless men, and the stubborn determination to keep everyone's pantry stocked. Your legs ache, but the road pulls you forward again, winding along cliffs that would make any hiker rethink life choices. And just when you're convinced the path is endless, a welcome sight appears on the horizon. A tampu, a way station. These little roadside outposts were the rest stops of the Inca world, though instead of gas pumps and questionable hot dogs, you found food storage, spare sandals, and a couple of runners stretching their calves. A tampa might be a small hut perched on a ledge, or a larger complex near a valley floor. Either way, it provided shelter, food, and the real treasure. People who weren't currently wheezing from climbing switchbacks. Chasquis rotated shifts here, always ready for the next handoff. You picture one lounging against a wall, chewing coca leaves, while his partner scans the road for faint outline of a runner charging toward them. Inside, the tampu storerooms bulge with dried maize, potatoes, salted fish, and textiles. Basically the Inca equivalent of mini-fridge, but one designed to supply armies. If you're lucky, you might find a clay jug of chicha, that slightly sour corn beer. You take a sip and wince at the tang, then remind yourself this was once considered sacred fuel for the empire. Not exactly a Starbucks latte, but it does the trick. But tampas weren't just for storage. They were also hubs of information. A runner could pause here long enough to drink, maybe hum a tune on a flute, and then blast a signal on a conch shell trumpet to announce that fresh news was arriving. Historians still argue whether every tampa used pitutus, or only some. Either way, you imagine the eerie sound echoing through the valleys, bouncing off cliffs, a low, rumbling call that meant incoming gossip from Cusco. Somewhere a sleepy llama probably raised an eyebrow at the racket. Quirky tidbit. Tampas could be staggered as close as every few miles in mountainous terrain, but in flatter regions they might be farther apart. That means some unlucky chasqui's whole life was basically a treadmill routine. Sprint to the next tampu. Hand off the message. Jog back home. Repeat until retirement, which probably came early if your knees gave out. You flop down on a stone bench and imagine what it must have been like to live here, halfway between nowhere and everywhere. The tampu attendants weren't just caretakers. They were also administrators. They kept the food safe, ensured supplies were ready for traveling officials, and sometimes even hosted troops passing through. You can see a whole caravan arriving, llamas loaded with goods, soldiers trailing behind, the air thick with dust, while the tampa keepers distribute rations and check records. Now, of course, not every tampa was a five-star inn. Some were tiny and Spartan, barely more than stone huts. Others, near important cities, were sprawling complexes. The variety reflected the empire's geography, jungle, highland, desert, all stitched together by the same infrastructure. You imagine stumbling into a jungle tampu after hacking through vines, only to be serenaded by cicadas while you try to sleep, or clambering into a wind-swept mountain tampu, where the only soundtrack is your own teeth chattering. Here's a mainstream fact. The tampus were critical in maintaining both communication and supply lines. Without them, the runners would collapse halfway through their sprints, and armies would starve on campaign. Some scholars even compare the network to a circulatory system. Tampus has the beating hearts, pushing resources and information along the arteries of stone roads. And the scholarly debate? Whether tampus also functioned as centers of cultural exchange. Some argue that messages weren't the only things passed along the road. Stories, songs, and even religious rituals may have traveled with the runners, stopping at tampus like waypoints of culture. Others counter that the stations were too focused on logistics to host much singing and storytelling. But you prefer to imagine a tired chasqui plucking a flute in the evening, trading jokes with his partner about whose sandals wore out faster. The night deepens around you. Stars scatter across the Andean sky, bright and cold. You lean back against the tampa wall, the stone still warm from the sun, and listen. Somewhere far off, a patuta moans, a sound both mournful and commanding, announcing yet another message racing across the empire. You smile at the absurdity of it. This entire system, this empire-spanning web of cord and sandals, sometimes boiled down to someone honking a giant seashell into the night. By now, your legs feel like boiled noodles, but you're still trudging along that stone spine of the Andes. The roads keep unfurling beneath you, tampus the horizon like beads on a string, and runners continue darting past, as if their lungs have secret spare tanks. You can't help but wonder, what kind of endurance does it take to live this way? To run every day at high altitude, fueled only by coca leaves, dried corn, and sheer stubborn willpower? For the chasquis, this was life. They weren't just messengers, they were lifelines. Their training was relentless, their bodies conditioned from youth. Imagine being chosen in your village for your quick feet, then whisked off to become part of the empire's pulse. Day after day, sprint after sprint, you live in pairs at tampus, taking turns so the line never broke. Some historians argue that the empire may have had as many as 10,000 chasquis scattered across its roads. 10,000 pairs of legs, keeping the Sapa Inca informed of everything from rebellions to potato blight. Mainstream fact. This endurance allowed the Inca to maintain one of the most centralized empires in the pre-modern world. Orders could travel astonishing distances with speed that rivaled horse couriers in Europe. It's said that messages could cross over 1,000 miles of rugged terrain in just under a week. Not bad for a society that never domesticated the horse. But here's the quirky bit. Some runners apparently carried little bells or whistles, not just conch shells, to alert the next tampu. You can almost hear now, the faint tinkling of a bell echoing through the hills, like some sort of Andean ice cream truck. Except instead of frozen treats, it's bringing news about llama taxes. The idea of an empire held together by jingling sandals is oddly charming. And still, debates persist. Historians still argue whether these runners only carried chords and spoken words, or whether they also bore more complex forms of narrative in quipus we haven't yet deciphered. Did some chasqui unknowingly sprint across mountains carrying an epic poem? Did he pause to sip chicha beer, not realizing he was holding the Andean equivalent of the Iliad in string form? You stand at a ridge, looking down on valleys that roll like green waves. The empire below seems impossibly vast, stitched together by trails of dust and stone. It's humbling to think that every decree, every census number, every anxious potato report raced across these roads one sweaty footstep at a time. And without it, the Inca experiment might have unraveled. No way to coordinate, no way to distribute, no way to hold the patchwork quilt of cultures together. The runners fade into silhouettes now, specks darting across mountain shoulders. The tampas sink into shadow. Even the quipus swinging from beams and storage huts look like sleepy strands of yarn, nodding off in the breeze. And you realize this entire system, the endless roads, the knots, the bells, the sprinting lungs, was more than just logistics. It was faith. Faith that a human body could outrun hunger and rebellion. Faith that an empire could trust its future to men with swift feet and quick breaths. Faith that communication, whether in knots or words, could stitch together millions of lives across mountains taller than dreams. And now, as your eyelids grow heavier, let's wind down gently. The mountain air softens, cooling into a hush. The stars spill brighter above, their light pooling on stone paths that no longer demand your steps. You're no longer climbing, no longer straining. You're simply drifting, as if carried along by the very runners you've been watching all this time. They move for you now, swift and tireless, while you sink into stillness. The quipus sway lazily in your mind, their knots loosening into nothing more than threads of color, threads of thought, threads of quiet. The tampas glow faintly, warm circles of safety, like lanterns strung across the night. A conch shell hums in the distance, low and steady, less a signal now than a lullaby. Even potatoes, yes, even potatoes, rest quietly in their earthen stores, waiting for tomorrow without urgency. The empire continues its rhythm, but you needn't keep pace with it any longer. You are safe to step aside, safe to let the road stretch on without you, safe to let the runners fade into the horizon. Breathe in, slow and even, like the thin Andean wind whispering across the peaks. Breathe out, softer still, as though you're exhaling into the stars themselves. Each breath loosens you further, untying the knots of the day, smoothing them into calm, into rest. The empire can wait. The messages will keep moving. For you, there is nothing left to carry. Only stillness. Only the quiet hum of night. Only sleep, drifting closer, closer now.